Hey everyone, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Razer Blackshark V2 Pro. Not this one. This is the Razer Blackshark V2 Pro. What? In all seriousness, they kept the same name on a new headset. They did this with the Barracuda X last year, and it's new in a lot of ways. It just looks the same. So normally when you have a V2, that means version 2, because the old Blackshark was version 1. The new one is still version 2. They didn't call it version 3. The only thing I can think of is it's because it looks almost identical. So maybe they're basing the version on the chassis, like the physical design, and not all of the improvements or feature changes. But either way, to make things simple, I'm going to start by doing a product comparison between the two to help you know which one you're buying, because the name is the same. Now, before I get any further, this was not sent to me for review. I purchased this one just like I purchased that one, I think 2 years ago. I just never reviewed it. I buy a lot of headsets and review as much as I can. I basically do this to provide honest and fair information. So if you do decide to buy this at the end of the review, I will have a link in the description below that helps support the channel, because I use that money to purchase headsets like these. So it wasn't sent to me by Razer. It won't affect what I say. I don't use that to bias my reviews in any way, but just full disclosure there. Now, if you like what you see, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to see it the future videos, and I also have my social media profiles down below for Instagram and Twitter, and sometimes I put some extra content there. So if you want to follow the channel more closely, don't forget to join those as well. So let's kick it off. So in case you're at the store and you're trying to figure out which one's which, the new version has a Bluetooth logo and the old one did not have Bluetooth. So check there. The old one had more stuff on the front, making it look a little bit busier. Then if you look at the back of the boxes, one of the things that'll stand out is the battery life. They overall laid out some of these things differently, but this one says up to 70 hours of battery life. This one didn't list anything, but it was closer to 40. So those are the quick ways to spot the differences on the box. Now, if you're shopping online, some of the things that are going to stand out is the price. This one has come down. It basically sells anywhere from $120 to $140, and the new one is retailing for $200 or $199. They made some changes, so let's talk about what was improved. Some of them are more obvious than the others. I mentioned the 70-hour battery life and the inclusion of Bluetooth, which is awesome. However, not to be a Debbie Downer, but the Bluetooth is not simultaneous. So what happens is you can pair it to your phone, then go play your games and use the wireless dongle on PC, PlayStation, and Mac. If you get a phone call, the headset will give you a little tone. You can tap the button on it and answer your Bluetooth call. And then when you hang up, it'll switch back over to game audio. But you can't be playing like a YouTube video on your phone at the same time you're playing and watching content through the wireless dongle on your computer or console. You have to pick one over the other. I'll talk about the controls, but it is what it is. It's Bluetooth 5.2, so the range is great. You just can't use it at the same time. Now, as far as changes to plugs go, well, the old one had an aux input, a 3.5 millimeter auxiliary cable, and that worked on the Xbox controller, whereas the new one, they dropped the aux connection, so you can no longer plug it in or use this on Xbox in any way. They did, however, change it to USB-C, which is awesome, and it comes with two cables in the box. One is a standard USB-A to C cable. The other one is a USB-A to A extension cable, which gives you a very long reach. The cables themselves are really high quality, just like it was on the older one. You cannot use this as a USB-C headset, so if you're trying to get better sound quality by switching to it, this is literally just for power. You can charge it at the same time you play, which is nice. Another interesting change is the dongle. They're both their little hyperspeed wireless dongles, so the range and speed is excellent. They have low latency. The older one had a nicer beveled edge and an embossed Razer logo. The new one is a very plain looking white square, and you can barely see the Razer text unless you angle it just right. Not sure why they made that look a little bit more simple, but that is another change. Now, on the more subtle stuff, there are a couple other things they did differently. They look identical if I'm holding them like this, but upon further inspection, it turns out the new one has slightly more dense padding. They look about to be the same thickness, however, they're just a little bit stronger fill. It helps with passive noise isolation, meaning that you shouldn't hear your background noise as much. It's not active noise cancellation, it just blocks some noise. And they also improve the padding material on the headband. I always found the older Blackshark to be quite comfortable, even though the pads are slightly shallow. They have a big opening so it fits my ear. They pad the baffle, so even if your ear touches the baffle, it's a very soft touch Some people don't like that feeling. It's not much better on the new one, but it wears even more comfortably because of the pad improvement. They are both great for glasses, so if you're concerned with comfort, it's a very compliant pad for the first, like, I don't know, quarter of an inch, 4 or 5 millimeters, so you can wear frames with this. But physically, that was another change. Now, they also improved the microphone. They have a massive capsule on the new one. You can see a huge difference in the microphones. I'll show you the microphone test after so you can hear the difference, but that was another change in addition to the battery life and the Bluetooth. Now, continuing with the physical stuff, they also subtly improved the hinge design. It's hard to tell, but this one has slightly thicker posts. So the sliding adjustment that you use for the headset is more robust. They also made it feel smoother. This one was more stiff, and it kind of locked in place, but it was also inconsistent. Like, it didn't pull out evenly from left and right, so you didn't get it to be perfectly straight unless you were careful in your adjustment. This new system is so much smoother and symmetrical. I mean, you pretty much get perfect adjustment every time. And when it's not moving, there's a little bit of a catch. And then once it moves, it glides again. It's a little thing, but it feels much better to use. It feels much more premium than the old one. So I do like that change a lot. Now, even though this looks the same too, the volume knobs are actually different. On the old Razer Blackshark V2 Pro, this was an analog knob. It had a potentiometer inside. There was a little notch for the half point, and you would adjust your volume independently of your source. So you can crank it and there's a hard stop. This new one has a digital volume knob, so there's no static or crackling sounds ever from adjusting the volume, but it spins indefinitely. So when you're connected to a Windows computer, for example, adjusting the volume on the new Razer Blackshark V2 Pro will adjust your Windows volume. It'll adjust your Mac volume. On PlayStation, this volume works independently of your PlayStation, so if you're connected to a PS5, make sure you turn the volume all the way up on your PS5, like hit the center button on the controller, go to your speaker icon, max out the volume, and then you could still use this to adjust from there. Now, the microphone improvements, the Bluetooth edition, the longer battery life are great upgrades, but as an audio guy, one of the really exciting things that they switched with the new one is the built-in EQ. And this is done exceptionally well. So you have a custom EQ option that you can save to the headset. So PlayStation players now benefit from a good headset on PS5 with your own EQ preference. It also has built-in EQs for game, movie, music, etc., in addition to custom. But the killer feature on this, on the right side, is this button. This is how you're toggling your EQ. If you press and hold this button, it switches to esports mode. In esports mode, it has CSGO, Valorant, Apex Legends, Fortnite, and Call of Duty. Now, obviously, if new games come out like X-Defiant, I don't know if firmware updates will change that later. However, they are all so drastically different with their EQ setting that you may find one of them works well for X-Defiant anyway. It's nice that it's built in, and it's great that PlayStation users can benefit, or PC users can also benefit, because now you don't need to use the Razer Synapse software to change the EQ. Which segues me to Razer Synapse. Now, normally I don't have a mention of the software on separate parts of the video, but I know not everyone watches the entire video. So I have to say this now. I had one of the worst user experiences I've recall having on a gaming headset in the past year or two from the first time setup, installation, and using Synapse on this headset. It's enough that I'm calling this out in its own chapter. And I'm not going to use this to bash the headset because there are pros and cons to everything, but this was a huge detractor for me. I could not for the life of me get my Razer Synapse to update once I connected this headset. It crashed repeatedly. It had failures. The program would just vanish while it was installing it. I ended up having to delete Razer Synapse, all of my temp files and local files that were tied to that program, restarted my computer, then reinstalled it from scratch. Finally got it to install and update again because a fresh install, I guess it updates based off what it detects. It said the update failed and then started working after that. It was insane. I spent over 45 minutes once all was said and done just to get the headset to detect and start working. I had different issues on my desktop. The desktop, it actually updated the app and it was working pretty quickly within a few minutes. I had to do my firmware update of the headset. But for some reason, only half the time the settings were working. The custom EQs weren't doing anything. My mic changes weren't doing anything. Then, to take my user experience further, even though all of my mic enhancements were turned off, I had no noise gate, no clarity boost, no custom EQ, nothing. When I was playing multiplayer games, my microphone was cutting out like crazy. The mic sounds incredible. I'm going to do a mic test here shortly, but when I play at night, my kids are sleeping. I'm not shouting. I'm not as energetic and peppy as I am in the video, but when I'm talking more quietly to my friends, it was almost like there's this firmware embedded noise gate that was attacking and decaying my voice so aggressively. It was almost like only 80% of what I was saying was coming through to my friends. It was just, I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't cutting out completely. It wasn't staticky. It's just I was talking to my friend and they were only getting most of what I was saying, enough to be super annoying to a point where they wouldn't want me to use this. I had to switch headsets until I can sort it out. It took a lot of tries and changes. I switched Discord to legacy mode. I disabled any and all other audio adapters that I could. I removed Razer Synapse, and it worked more normally on PlayStation and Mac, but it was a nightmare for me on Windows, and especially on games like Call of Duty. I had all of the noise thresholds turned off. I never had to tamper with this stuff before on any other headset. And in that same setting, all I did was switch to the Nova 7, the Astra 830, and the Stealth 700 Gen 2, and all of those worked fine with everything set exactly how this was set. All I did was switch the transmitter. This one had so many problems, I was getting annoyed. I mean, it took me hours before I finally got it working the way it's supposed to. Then I go to the whole EQ testing and measuring side, and half the time the EQ settings weren't working. I'd have to unplug the transmitter, power cycle the headset, then it would start working again. I know some of these things could be operator error, it could be tied to my computers, but I have to share that experience because I feel I'm fairly technical when it comes to this stuff, and I never had to deal with that before. So I wanted to call that out. Not a great way to start my first impressions of the headset, but the review and play must go on. So let's get back to some positivity and talk about comfort. I mentioned a lot of the comfort stuff with my comparison to the older Blackshark. The pads aren't crazy compliant. They actually don't compress much. When I put this on, if you could see that, and I push down, I'm pushing really hard and they don't really move. So they're fairly thin, and as a whole, they take quite a bit of pressure to compress, but with the light clamp force and the initial compression, you can see how little that takes. It's still very comfortable to wear. The pads are large, they're just somewhat shallow, so your ears will touch this padded baffle just slightly, but not in a super uncomfortable way. I could play on these for a very long period of time, and they're arguably one of the most comfortable headsets I've used under $200. The headband is excellent as well, and like I said, I really like the adjustment. It doesn't have any swivel, it's flexible, but there's no pivot or rotation of the cups. If you put this around your neck, you have to kind of angle these pads just so it clears your neck a little bit, but it doesn't lay flat on your shoulders like some other gaming headsets do. And the other thing is it kind of got ahead of me. I don't know if you can hear it. Mine makes some noise. I don't know where the noise comes from. It sounds like it might be in the headband. I don't know if that's going to get worse over time, but if you're angling it, it just makes that sound. That's how mine sounds. So that was kind of weird, but overall, even though it makes that sound, it does feel better in my hands than the old one. Just in case people are concerned with the pad dimensions, I have a width, I think it was 45. It's about 44, 45 millimeters, and on the height is about 60, if you can get that on the camera, about 65 millimeters. I know it's hard to get the angle. It doesn't help that I can't rotate these, but like I said, they are pretty large in size. And now I'm talking on the Razer Blackshark V2 Pro 2023 edition microphone. This capsule upgrade is no joke. The microphone sounds excellent, and there's even a built-in pop filter, so it does a really good job of handling someone who is very loud and outspoken. Obviously, I mentioned the whole noise gate issue earlier. If you're talking quietly, you lose some of those sounds, but we'll see how much of that comes through in the video. I'm talking kind of loud right now. So I do want to show you the software. Kicking things off, this is my custom EQ. So I would take a picture here if you're buying this headset, and I'll put numbers up on the screen to help you tune it because I'll show you how that impacts the sound quality later. It's a pretty drastic change on EQ, but I do like the result. Now you do have game, you have movie, music, esports, which will give you, there's all the games I mentioned earlier, and like I said, they are all very different,
as far as EQ profile goes. So even if you're not playing that game, you can always experiment with these and see if you like one over the other based off the game that you're playing. You can enable THX spatial audio at the top, which changes the sound as well in addition to the EQ response, but that's to enable the spatial sound for the headset. Otherwise, just stay in stereo mode. Moving on to enhancement, you have Do Not Disturb, which literally blocks calls from your phone so you don't know it's ringing. Sound normalization is a compressor, so it's going to boost the subtle noises and reduce the peak volume of the loud noises. It can be helpful for FPS, even though it makes it harder to determine how far someone is. You can always experiment with that and at different levels. Bass boost and voice clarity are pretty self-explanatory. If you want even more bass than what the EQ is giving you, you can do that here. Then in the microphone settings, I have the gain maxed out because this microphone, even though it sounds really nice and it's voiced well, it's not super sensitive. So if you are a soft-spoken person, definitely make sure this volume is maxed out. Now, voice gate. There seems to be a voice gate whether you enable it or not. That's the whole subtle thing I was talking about. And sometimes at night when I'm playing a game, it doesn't always pick me up. And you might find that as I'm talking now, even if I'm talking softer, it doesn't flow or sound as natural because there's a really aggressive decay as my voice trails off. If I want that to be even more aggressive, I can turn the voice gate on like I just did. And if you enable it like here, even at 68%, depending on what's coming through, it's affecting the leading sounds and the trailing sounds of my voice even further. So I'm going to leave that off. Volume normalization. Normalization is literally making it so if you are more soft-spoken, for the stuff that does come through, it's going to boost it. And if you're very loud, the stuff that's really loud, it's going to reduce it. It's a compressor for your voice, and that'll help if you don't always maintain a similar volume as you talk to your friends or on a live stream. Vocal clarity is more like an upper mid-range treble boost to make it sound more clear. Noise cancellation is how you do background noise rejection. So that's different than the noise gate earlier. It's not like you're controlling when it turns on or off. This is just to reduce background noise. So I'm going to type on the keyboard with it off. Let's turn it back on. And let's go to 80%, just to give you a quick example. So this is my voice with typing in the background. And that is the noise cancellation. So let's turn that back off and let's scroll down to here. And you have, I can't get this sidebar. It's 1 pixel wide. Why did they do that? Okay, so the mic EQ. This is the default EQ. Now I can hit mic boost, which is going to boost the mid-range of my voice and it makes it sound a little bit thinner, but it does make it louder. Broadcast is one of my favorite presets because it makes it sound warm. It has some heft to your voice and it reduces some of that harshness in the upper mid-range. Conference call takes away all of that warmth and bass and boosts, to me, one of the harshest parts of the microphone. Then custom, you can literally custom EQ your mic, and these settings do apply for console, so if once you hit save, it's saved to the headset. And you can, what I recommend as a custom tune is just boost 125 by a little bit and reduce 1 kilohertz and 2 kilohertz a little bit, and that all produces, in the end, I think, a slightly warmer voice without any of that shriekiness. And then all the way at the bottom is side tone. I am not a fan of the side tone on this headset. It sounds digital and compressed, almost like you're listening to yourself as a 64 kilobit MP3 file, like the old MP3s that sound compressed or Sirius XM radio. It sounds digital. And if you boost it up really loudly, let's see where the threshold is about 75. But when you get in like the 90s and 100, there is so much background interference noise. You hear like electronic, like swooshing and swirling and all this weird electronic interference. In addition to your voice still sounding digitized. It's in real time, there's no delay, but you do not sound like yourself. It sounds like a very low quality version of yourself. So this is one of those headsets where I just recommend leaving it off or at a lower volume. Power is self-explanatory. You can turn the power saving on and off and then set it from 15 to 60 minutes. And then if you click on demo, this is where you can enable or disable the THX audio demo example so you can hear what it sounds like with all your changes. I recommend just using a YouTube clip of a game you play or your own music or your own video clip that you recorded, play that, and then mess with the settings and see what you like. So that's the software, that's the microphone.
So now I want to talk about sound quality, which is going to be a mix of objective measurements. I have measurement equipment to see exactly how this sounds, talk about my actual game experience and the whole subjective thing and what I like and dislike. The Razer has a special sound. It's on the Blackshark line. It is a bass forward, recessed mid-range, and kind of inconsistent sparkly highs on the top end. So if you want like warm, borderline muddy, kind of thunderous bass, the Blackshark V2 Pro has that. It's a bass heavy headset. But I do want to show you the difference of something compared to last year's Blackshark V2 Pro, or 2 years ago. They actually measure a little bit differently, and the older one measured better. There's less of a dip in the mid-range. The bass delivery is a little bit more flat, and the treble delivery is also more smooth. It doesn't have as much of a spike and dip. And when you have, it's one thing to have elevated treble, but if you have a lot of peaks and valleys of that same elevated treble, some stuff will sound bright and sharp, and other stuff will sound dark and recessed. And it can really affect the tonality or timbre. If you're listening to music, it doesn't sound natural or close to what the recording was intending. For gaming, it's a lot less noticeable and it makes less of a difference, but I just wanted to show you how that stacks up. Now, if you compare this headset with the THX profile enabled, it screws up the sound even further. This dip at 2 kilohertz is insane and it is noticeable, and this treble boost is like ear-piercing sharp. I can't listen to it at louder volumes, it hurts my ears, and then it also screws up the bass delivery over here. THX is used as a virtual spatializer. It can kind of simulate a surround effect, but the way it affects the EQ and the frequency response is quite negative. And you can always try this. I'm not going to tell you what's right or wrong. It's your headset. It's your preference. But it did negatively measure or negatively impact the way the headset sounded on the measurement standpoint. And for me, the biggest takeaway is it was just too sharp. It hurt my ears. Now, I wanted to show you my custom EQ real quick, just so you can see how that measures. I didn't want to take away the signature sound of the Razer Blackshark V2 Pro 2023 edition. I wanted to enhance it and clean it up. So the biggest change on a positive note is in that 125 hertz region, which usually I leave boosted for FPS and I drop the sub bass. But this headset worked better with that custom EQ for most of the stuff I played because it sounded way too muddy and boxy sounding in stock form. It cleans up very nicely, but this just sounded better for music and gaming. I lifted the mid-range so it's not as recessed, which means vocals and certain instruments come through more. And on the games, some of that subtle mid-range stuff, things that hum like a car engine, if you're hearing voices in the game, they just sound more natural. They don't sound as distant. I smoothed out the treble just a little bit and reduced some of that upper 7 to 8K peak because, again, I don't want the fatigue of like sharp sounding treble. I need it to be a little bit smoother. So I didn't do a drastic EQ. I wanted to keep some of what made it great, but I also wanted to get rid of the stuff that bothered me. So I touched a little bit on the subjective side, kind of like what I liked and disliked during the measurement portion of the sound, but I do want to elaborate just a little bit more to explain it. Don't use just the frequency response measurements or my EQ as like the ultimate end-all be-all, because you may like different things. Your ears may hear differently. So you can use either my EQ or their bass EQ as a profile to start with and then tune from there. Out of the box, I can tell you based off my experience and other things I've listened to, these are very bass forward, somewhat muddy. It's not a tight, crisp bass. It's a little bit sloppy sounding, which isn't like awful. It's just the way they sound. The mid-range is recessed and the treble, some parts are dark and some parts are really sharp and sparkly. It's just not consistent. So depending on what you listen to and what you like, you may like that sound. It's very unique. It's not my favorite sound profile. However, once EQ'd or toggling through some of the built-in presets, I still had a lot of fun playing games because some of the most important things for gaming is how good the wireless connection is, which this is excellent, very low latency. Comfort has to be important, which this is excellent. It was very comfortable for long sessions. So a lot of the stuff for gaming is checked off just with that. sound quality has to be good enough. And for gaming, it was fine. It actually images well, so I was able to pinpoint the location of footsteps. The soundstage is pretty bad. It's very closed off and claustrophobic, so you don't necessarily know how far things are, and you don't get the same vast sense of space that some other headsets do in this price range. The Stealth 700 Gen 2 and the Nova 7s have a wider soundstage while also still imaging extremely well. This is a fun, cozy, warm, kind of hugs you type sound. It's not this high energy, hyper focused sound profile that the Nova 7s have. Some people don't like that sound. It's too shouty and in their face. If you get rid of the 8K peak with this, they're very different sound signatures. So I didn't feel like I was not being competitive in Call of Duty. I just had to focus a little bit harder with this compared to my Nova 7s and my Stealth 700 Gen 2s. Those made footstep tracking just a little bit easier for me without having to try as hard to pinpoint those subtle noises in the game mix, especially when it's really busy. Now, this does do spatial audio just fine. You can do Tempest 3D audio on PlayStation with this dongle connected. On Windows, if you purchase Dolby Atmos or DTS, you can use those. Windows Sonic is free. I confirmed and used all of them on this and it worked fine. My preference going towards Atmos and DTS. DTS was actually more fun than I remember it being, especially on this headset. It sounded great. I'm not a huge fan of THX, but that does come with Razer. I think Razer owns THX, so that's why they're bundling it. But you always try and pick what you like. I just didn't like the sound impact that the THX had, spatial audio had on it. 16-bit only headset. It doesn't run 24-bit audio. Not the end of the world, but I just want to call that out in case you want to know. So let's move on to the competitors. And what a time to be alive. There are so many competitors in this price range and above and below. It's just insane what you can buy nowadays. And I do want to say this real quick. My goal is not to convince you to buy the latest and greatest of every single thing. You may have one of these and you're debating on buying this instead. The differences can be fairly minimal at the end of the day. It's not going to change the game you're playing. It's not going to make you have more or less fun with your friends unless something is a train wreck. And that's why I try to make these videos as honest as possible, because what's latest and greatest isn't always the end-all be-all you need to buy and upgrade. Sometimes having the older stuff is still fine. So I want to talk about how these competitors stack up to maybe help you, see what's good and bad about each in comparison. The Sony InZone H7 and H9. Surprisingly very comfortable, even with the leatherette pads. This thing is crazy comfy to wear for PlayStation gaming. I would not get it for PC gaming because frankly there are better options for the money. The microphone is pretty terrible, and I'm being polite when I say that. It's a bad mic for how much you're spending, and the sound quality is probably the worst here. Yeah, it's the worst sounding headset here. It's not terrible, but it's just the worst sounding one here. So why would you get it? Well, if you're playing on PlayStation, thanks to Sony, the InZone lineup and the Pulse headset are the only ones that give you game-to-chat mix through the headset. Otherwise, you have to press the button on your controller to manually fade game-to-chat. Sony lets you have a dedicated button, but only if you buy their own stuff. In typical Sony fashion, the software and the features are there, it's capable, but they don't let you use it unless you buy their own products. So that's kind of a bummer. It has no fault of these headsets. That's just Sony being Sony. Unless you specifically need game to chat mix for PlayStation, there's no reason to buy this over the Blackshark because there's no way to EQ this for PlayStation. They disable that unless you're on Windows. The EQ only works with their Pulse headset on PlayStation. So a really interesting omission. The one pro to this, though, is it does have simultaneous Bluetooth. So if you must have that and you're playing on PlayStation, you can use Bluetooth at the same time. Then you get into the Nova 7X. Nova 7X gives you game-to-chat mix on Xbox and PC thanks to the Sonar software. No game-to-chat mix on PlayStation, but we've been over that. It has a 3.5mm aux input, so you can plug this in passive mode if you want to go directly wired to something. It has simultaneous Bluetooth. Extremely comfortable. The ear pads are a little bit smaller from a diameter standpoint, but they are a little bit deeper than these. So you might feel a little pressure on top and bottom of your ear, but it's not going to be sandwiching it in. The value of these for $160 to have that level of feature set and still have competitive sound. These sound a little bit more shouty, but I still find them very competitive. And I really do like using these because of how easy they are to use. especially with that game to chat mix wheel. The Astro 830, this is a weird one. It's $230, so it retails for the highest price here, but it does have some pretty good features to it. It has really strong deep bass. If you want thunderous bass, this has the best bass of any Astro headset ever released from a power and impact standpoint. The microphone is the second worst here, only to the Sony. It's a pretty bad microphone. It has game to chat mix, which does work on Xbox, and it does work on computer or Windows without needing any special software. It also has simultaneous Bluetooth. It has AAC Bluetooth support, so it works really well for Apple phone. Comes with a hard carrying case. Has an aux fallback, but does not work on PlayStation in the Xbox version unless you spend another, I think it's $20 or $30 on the dongle. So this is starting to pass $250 if you want full cross-platform compatibility. Stealth 700 Gen 2, vice-like clamp force. It's the strongest clamp force here, but the ear pads are incredibly soft. These are amazing quality ear pads. They stay cool for a long period of time. The microphone's decent. It's better. It's probably better than all of these except the Razer as far as the microphone sound quality goes. The sound quality of the game performance and music is actually really, really nice, and you can do some custom EQ tuning through the mobile app, just like you can with the Astro. Razer, even though it's Bluetooth, you can't EQ it through the mobile app. I'm trying to condense so much information. I'm sorry if I'm doing this quickly, but this video I know is going to be long. So in this, the Xbox version of the Stealth 700 Gen 2 Max works on all platforms wirelessly. So why would I pick the Razer? Well, especially for PlayStation gaming, if you don't need game to chat mix or the simultaneous Bluetooth, this is actually one of my favorite headsets on PlayStation right now, because it has a very large array of EQ presets for console gaming, which most headsets often ignore. They usually give you one or two tops or none. So I love having that feature. And then you mix the fact that it has a very reliable wireless connection and it's so comfortable. It's actually a great choice for PlayStation. The issue I have is the Razer Synapse software and the lacking of game to chat mix and simultaneous Bluetooth when you start doing more content consumption for Windows and mobile devices. So we made it to the end. I knew this was going to be long. I'm sorry. There's just so much to say about the Blackshark V2 Pro 2023 edition, not the V3. I really like this for PlayStation at $200 and below because of the comfort, the wireless stability, and all of those EQ presets. It's a great value. If you don't need simultaneous Bluetooth, I see a lot of merit there. I just had so many issues on Windows that I hope, like other brands have, that this improves over time with software updates. Astro, Epos, and Odyssey have all been improving their headsets like fine wine as time goes on. Even Stealth, the the Turtle Beaches, they had some firmware updates that fix wireless issues. So this could get better. My biggest issues on Windows is the Razer Synapse software worked half the time for me. I was either getting my EQ profiles or I wasn't. And the microphone issues in games like Warzone, I simply could not use it on PC with Warzone because it kept dropping like a third or a quarter of anything I was saying unless I was speaking very loudly. The decay is so aggressive, it just sounded unnatural. And that was a game-breaking thing for me, which sucked because I really do like a lot of other things about this headset. Luckily, that can get improved over time with firmware because, as you heard, the microphone quality itself is great. So I hope I didn't make your decision harder. That's never my goal. I hope you found this video helpful and honest and helps you make a decision in some way or another. Otherwise, if you're just watching for the entertainment, thank you so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to see you at the next video. That being said, I'll see you next time.